Gwini cór an gédal sias so óhas ar an bhéilih agus gwym go gra agus bannacht darí is na cainteanna méid ar siúlá ar is na seachtaine. It's a very great pleasure to be here this morning for the commencement of National Adult Literacy Awareness Week. It is not the first time that I remember speaking at the initiation of these weeks, but they're such important weeks in the month of September. But they're important for so many reasons. But I'd like to thank Ines Bailey for inviting me to join you here today, and Gormila Mark Airsocht and Firkin Fulcher. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. This important week commences really with today's public seminar entitled Learning and Life Chances, Promoting Equality Through Basic Education. Promoting equality is a challenge that is global. It's a challenge that is European, and it is a challenge that is national. And literacy is a crucial dimension of that. Well, I think it is fair to say that while progress has been made in some recent decades in Ireland in making education, including higher education, more accessible for our citizens, for many, getting to the point of access to that education itself is still very difficult. It is encouraging too that progress is being made both in the levels of participation and in education and in the development of services and infrastructure to assist those who have traditionally faced obstacles on the path towards achieving their full educational and personal potential. I was introduced to work like NALA, and particularly its volunteers, by a very dear friend who worked very near here, for its director of the National Library at his day, and that was Alf McLaughlin, who was an early pioneer in literacy. And I watched him patiently go about his task, and it was very impressive. But there remains a great distance, despite the changes and progress that have been made in contemporary Ireland. There's a great distance to travel yet, and that's where NALA comes in these events every September. I also remember, I have to say, that for talking to, in the time my advice centres, in my years as a public representative, meeting a wonderful man who bought horses in England and brought them home to Ireland, member of the long time training. He had been running horses for carriages in Galway in his day, and he brought his grandchild with him so that he would be able to negotiate the roundabouts in England. And I asked them once, what if you took the wrong direction? And they said, we just keep going round, and so on. They were practical things that stoked participation that are very important. So I don't have any abstract connection with this area, and it's a reason why I'm very privileged to be a patron of your association. I think that in the contemporary period, it is surely worrying that in 2013, an OECD survey showed that literacy levels among Irish 16 to 65-year-olds were below average, with up to 1/6 of Irish adults having difficulty understanding basic written text. I've spoken recently about how this inequality in literacy raises very fundamental questions about the nature of our republic. And later on next week I will be speaking about its impact on the vibrancy of our democracy. Literacy is the gateway to participation in society, and that's its most important part. More important, it is very important that literacy be available to provide a person with skills so that they can in fact meet their needs and address issues of necessity and issues of consumption. But above all else, it is because it is a gateway to participation that it is a fundamental right and should be a priority for all who are concerned with human rights and equality. But if we are to recognise that it is a right, well then obligations arise, of course, for the state to ensure that the necessary interventions are put in place, and at the most effective stages, which probably means, I think your speakers will address this issue as early as possible. But in a global and technological age in which we find ourselves now, the definition of literacy cannot any longer be confined to reading and writing, but must also encompass the ability to understand and engage in many means of communication, including spoken language, broadcast media, and digital media. I think the Nobel economist Amartya Sen spoke about the importance of being able to participate without shame in your life, in every aspect of the decisions that are taken that affect your life. We're becoming increasingly aware of the importance of numeracy skills and mathematical reasoning and problem solving, and in meeting the day-to-day demands of life. I think there are obligations that are on two sides that are very, very important. You will be addressing, and as patron of NALA, I very, very strongly support the efforts that have been made to bring people into a conversation. But there are very, very many obligations that arise on the other side, and that is those who are privileged to be in a space of communication, of being able to take on the responsibility of wanting to communicate in a way that includes human empathy, in a way that in fact solves issues of class, rather than using issues of class as an instrument of distance in the conversation. In a world where decisions are made by powerful bodies and institutions that can have enormous effects on the lives of individuals, I've made the case that basic literacy in relation to economics must also be a prerequisite for empowering citizens to play an active part in the political and public life of their country. Those who structure programs too have an influence, of course, here. It isn't entirely unusual, I remember all those decades ago saying, a conversation in which you would have a vox pop, which assumes that people don't really understand what is going on in the world. Then you have elected representatives who may have a slightly better view, and then you come on to the experts who really do know after all, and then the program ends. I think I read in preparation for a paper I'm giving towards an appropriate discourse for the European Union that I'll give at New York University next week, this issue of seeing documents, for example, that have appeared from the European Commission at times, which address what are apparently technical issues, and they have to be technical because the material is technical. But it does carry an obligation with it that if the decisions for which the policy is being suggested affect citizens, the citizens have a fundamental right to know what the shape of the proposals are. Failure to achieve this literacy of which I speak, economic literacy, it has created a growing sense of detachment and disengagement from the democratic processes and from democratic policy options. When people in Europe speak about, such as Jürgen Habermas, about a deliberative democracy, you should be able to transact. And we must be assisted in being able to transact, understanding fully the choices that we make and that we balance with each other. Publics often feel that they are passive objects of what often are perceived, as I have given the example, I would say, that 2012 document that came from the Commission, as technocratic solutions. One of Europe's most leading intellectuals, Jürgen Habermas, gave the title to his last book, The Lure of Technocracy. The idea being that is at the root, in a way. We need skills that are technical, and many of the issues that we have to deal with are complex. But that complexity must be unraveled so that citizens can participate. The old debate about literacy always was, I remember, if you looked at the history of literacy, when in fact people peasants and citizens were making the campaign first. And those in authority said, the difficulty is they won't want to just read the Bible, they'll want to read Tom Paine's pamphlets as well. So that, in a way, this hangs there as a very serious issue in the background. If you say you are a favour of democracy, and if you say you are in favour of a vibrant democracy, literacy is crucial, and all forms of literacy in relation to technology, communications, politics, economics, because they're all founded on the importance of access to information, the ability to read and understand text. At its most commonly understood level, of course, and this is the really most serious part, illiteracy and exclusion from reading creates a deeply shadowed world which denies its inhabitants the ability to communicate in the most very basic ways. In that last OECD survey, where 1/6 of our population had reported difficulty in reading a text message, sending an email, using a timetable or a map or an ATM machine, or avail of so many of the tools which are necessary to navigate and ease our way through daily life. Now that's important, but I come to it in another sense too. Then parents, because of their illiteracy, cannot read to their children a bedtime story or help them with their homework, sign a birthday card, or read a menu in a restaurant. And I think that's incredible that we have to ask ourselves, is that when illiteracy is transmitted from one generation to another, that raises serious policy questions. Then the consequence, of course, is that so many who are in that position are confined to low-paid, low-skilled employment. They haven't the opportunities of fulfilling their potential personally or educationally. And for many, their entire life, as I often met them at my advice centres, consists of constructing strategies, rather like the man going round the roundabout or bringing his grandchild with him, constructing pathways to get around these obstacles. All these barriers and obstacles are standing in the way of advancement. But it is too common as well, and very, 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 as we have seen. And I do want to pay tribute to those soaps and others who have addressed some of these issues. They have been helpful. Is the shame that some people still, or the low self-esteem, or a sense of isolation, a fear of being found out in your strategies for negotiating the situation in which you find yourself in. These often haunt the lives of those who struggle in a society that still attaches some kind of shock or stigma to illiteracy. Indeed, in many cases, illiteracy has to be concealed for that reason, not only from employers and colleagues, but also from partners and children and close friends. And I think it is terribly important to realise is that the society has to move on to know that if a person has in fact either missed or not availed of or lost the opportunities that they were earlier, that they be given back, and that they be given back generously, given back in a manner, a mode of conversation that invites the people into the slow, hard work for many people of filling this gap. For others who may have left school with basic writing and reading skills, the rapid progress of technology and particularly its form of delivery has placed them on the wrong side of the digital divide, which has emerged between those who can access and make use of new technologies and those who can't. And that does raise issues as to the form of the introduction of the technology in the society and the privileging or otherwise of citizens as having their competence brought first before, in fact, their availability of consumers is considered. And that policy issue is one for governments of different kinds. The issue as to how the new technologies, I've said, particularly in communications, how citizens access services, is a fundamental moral and political choice. And as more and more information becomes available exclusively online, and an increasing array of formal documents are required to be accessed, completed and submitted electronically, there is a real danger that as a society we might create a new layer of inequality, a new fissure in our society, and a growing sense of isolation who find themselves struggling to overcome that digital gap. And these are people who just simply don't just lack competences. There are citizens who have a right to participate fully. And helping such citizens of ours requires great skills of the heart as well as skills of the head. And I repeat that, very serious linguistic skills. It's one of the most interesting things is that as institutions have changed in Ireland, many of them, people still speak the same way, with an authoritarian tone very often, tone of superiority. People who haven't really, as they open a conversation with somebody who needs to be assisted, address the obstacles that their own social class places between them as an effective communicator. I think there are issues involved in all of this, in preparing oneself to be, as it were, the best friend a person who's overcoming this obstacle can possibly be. Not just a friend because you can't be soft, because there's good hard work to be done as well. But I've admired, and so many, and I had them as friends, who have given this task their empathy, their patience, and their love, because they very often have that great exhilarating moment when the life changes for the person who is the person to whom they're talking. But as a republic and a democracy, we have a duty to create an Ireland where citizenship is based on participation and rights, and where the value of a citizen as carrier of those rights is respected. It's a concept based on the understanding of the state as a shared responsibility rather than any abstract entity. Often think, for example, in the old days, in relation to local authorities sometimes, and when I would speak to people in the different estates, and they talk to me about the corpo. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is, they had a great understanding of what one side of it was, but I'm not sure as to the degree to which, in fact, all its mechanisms were communicated. But a true republic must be built on principles and policies which recognise the common welfare and which place the needs of community and public at its centre, and rejecting the limitations of a narrow individualistic concept of citizenship. I don't think we can claim to be such a place just yet, when some of our citizens are failed by society, which allows them to be deprived of that most basic of civil rights, the ability to communicate fully, and to have an effective voice in their communities and in their society. And very often it is because there are obstacles for communication like that you get anger and rage instead of discourse. And discourse is what we so badly need in nearly every part of our life for solving problems. A culture which accepts that citizens will fall through the cracks, will drop out of its educational system unable to read or write, will become disengaged or disfranchised at an early age, really couldn't call itself a true republic. Because at the heart of republicanism, in its original sense, lies the principle of the citizens participating and the right of all citizens to be represented and to have their voices heard. And we have a responsibility and a duty to enable all members of our society to receive an education that will allow them to become informed, participative citizens. And if we are to become a true republic, based on the sovereignty of the citizens, of the people, it is vital that we ensure that members of our society have been given all the skills to question and challenge decisions made by individuals and institutions in positions of power and authority, ensuring such decisions are ethical, based on fairness, and not on any privilege derived from wealth or position. And there can be no room in such a vision of citizenship for obstacles that hinder, or even for some prevent full participation due to poverty, discrimination, lack of basic competences and lifelong learning opportunities, or any form of illiteracy that leaves people vulnerable to prejudice, inequality, abuse, or exclusion. We should be well past the notion, I'm only an ordinary Joe Soap, which is such an offensive kind of suggestion in a way, and as an indicator of where the society is. Under I think undoing these obstacles are a challenge not just to the state, but to all of us as members of society. And organisations such as NALA, its workers, its volunteers, and events such as this are critical to the achievement of such a citizenship. For 35 years now, NALA has worked with enormous dedication and commitment to ensure that people with the literacy difficulties of which I've been speaking can access learning supports, advancing adult literacy policy as well, with different governments through advocacy and through engagement with government departments and relevant organisations. So these unacceptable levels of illiteracy that persist in Ireland, that are there coming from the OECD survey, whatever reservations you might have about its methodology, I think, in fact, I want to pay tribute to NALA and State and all the organisations that have, for the progress they've made since the 1990s. I also think as well, today's seminar is yet another important and constructive undertaking by NALA, and it will bring us down the road a bit farther, which is very, very important in terms of the removal of barriers for people with literacy difficulties. I've seen the programme. It's an inspiring one, discussion on vital issues such as the importance of parental involvement in a child's education. I know this as a parent myself, and Sabina often remember about sitting down alongside one's child and doing and reading. What a great, great opportunity it is, and what an opportunity lost it is for those who can't do that. Then there's the role of further education in increasing opportunities for employment. But most important is beyond usefulness. It is just participating, knowing everything that's going on and being part of it in the public world. But illiteracy is a complex issue, as the different papers show, requiring many different types of support. But of course it tells us that education is a key in the battle against illiteracy, and early identification is very, very important. I want to just say that struggling to catch children whose reading skills start to fall behind at an early age struggle to catch up. That's the importance of early intervention. And we know too that children who do not learn to read, write and communicate effectively are less likely to complete a second level education and more likely as adults to be unemployed or trapped in low-skilled jobs. That midpoint in the second level education where people drop out. There can be no doubt that the development from an early age of good literacy skills is fundamental to both the life chances of each citizen, and it's crucial if we're following a programme of equality. I have, in my visits to prisons, both during my time as president and long before it, have noticed the significance of illiteracy in both recidivism and drug dependency. And the great disadvantage illiteracy is in seeking to survive what are often some of the negative aspects of culture in prison. In light of this, perhaps, and I have to say that, there have been real good gains within the prison service, and I so praise all of those who are doing work for prisoners. In the light of this, we need to reflect on our current approach, maybe where investment in education is concentrated heavily as it is in the later years. The Department of Education and Skills National Strategy to Improve Literacy and Numeracy among Children and Young People 2011-2020. That government report, I think, from the Department of Education shows that literacy and numeracy skills are developed along a continuum that starts in early childhood, runs on through primary and into post-primary education. But each stage creates its new challenges, and each stage requires a different suite of interventions. But that timely interventions, I think the research shows now, without contradiction, are the best. But I think those timely interventions can break the cycle as well of the intergenerational illiteracy that I spoke about. And that leads, of course, not just to the disengagement of parents from their fulfillment, but also their children. And I think, in a way, I'm finishing by saying this, Mar focail scéir chun críocha cá leis an méid atá le Rome, is go míle maithacha a sachtéiste lan, agus táchas ar an bhéin seo. I think that as we go into an enormous set of commemorations for the coming year in 2016, is there any better way of honouring the values of our proclamation of our republic and of those who gave us the opportunity to have an independent state than seeking a version of the state that really deepens democracy through making special efforts in areas like literacy? So let us strive to eradicate illiteracy from our society, accepting our shared obligation to ensure that no one is denied the important tool of citizenship that is literacy. And let us never forget that citizenship is more than about rights, it's about belonging, of being at home in one's world without fear and shame. And it is only through the envisaging of such a citizenship that we can craft together a future built on inclusion, a creative society, and a real republic. But apart altogether from those whom we seek to assist and those who are assisting them, there's need also for a reflection about the way we go about discussing these issues and the way that we communicate. And in a way, if you like, how much will be released in ourselves if we discover what I call these instruments of the heart, which really, in the end of the day, are the instruments that brought us the independence we have and that brought independence and emancipation to people all around the world. I want to thank all of you who are here today for the work you have done. And may the third Jantaki, I want to thank you for your continuing efforts at creating such a citizenship. And I'm confident that this Awareness Week will be yet another positive stepping stone on all of our journey towards realizing this vision. And I want to wish you a very successful week, very successful discussions, very successful new strategies, and a very fruitful discussion here today. Garamila Mahaki is Gwyn Banach or Nirachti and Shachtan Shah Istan Tauki.